local institutions. And the individuals working in the World Bank or in the NGOs have their own career objectives. Like, I want to give out a lot of loans so I can get promoted. In the World Bank, they have nothing to do with development. So it's just we need to be sort of sophisticated in how we think about these institutions. Okay, so just to transition to kind of the next paper and the next idea, is there some way to provide assistance? Let's say we do think there needs to be a response to colonialism. We do think there needs to be a response by rich countries to help poor countries. How can we do it without weakening local institutions? Yeah. Yeah. Exactly. So, a more positive way of viewing all those loans in the 80s and 90s. Remember that there were a lot of civil wars breaking out at that time. With the end of the Cold War, there was another surge of civil wars that broke out in the early 90s. One way to view some of these loans was, you know what, we don't care if conditions are met or not. We're going to give heavily subsidized loans just to maintain stability. I'm actually quite sympathetic myself to that argument, having worked on civil war and the links between these kind of climate or income triggers and civil war. So that would be another use of aid where you might say, look, even if foreign aid in the long run weakens institutions, if it avoids a civil war, or it has some chance of sort of averting a civil war, it would be a worthwhile thing to do. So that would be another justification. It's a little bit like the anti-retroviral story. If we can avert a catastrophe with foreign aid, how can we not do it? Especially if the majority of people in country want that assistance. But we have to think carefully about the long-run implications of intervening over and over again in that way. Okay, how can we provide aid without weakening institutions? There's an approach that's become very popular in the last decade, 10, 12, 15 years, called community-driven development, CDD. Sometimes goes by other names, but this is a common acronym. And billions of dollars a year are now going into community-driven development. This shift towards CDD was part of what Wolfensohn pushed for in the bank. So instead of just sending billions of dollars to central governments to build infrastructure, let's fund, the idea behind CDD is let's fund lots of local authorities, local governments, villages, community groups, regional governments, and fund them, avoid these powerful officials in the capital. And when we give this money, let's not just fund public services, but let's use the money to strengthen institutions or improve institutions. Let's use the money to train local officials. Let's use the money to make local institutions more democratic, to get marginalized groups involved. Let's use this funding as a leverage to improve governance rather than destroy governance. That was the idea behind CDD. A lot of CDD programs have a very strong gender focus. There's a strong pattern in most African countries and also Asian countries and also Western countries and also Latin American countries that women are underrepresented in politics relative to men. So the idea is, could this funding at the local level be tied to certain types of conditions, for instance, that women had to fill a certain fraction of seats in local councils or local government offices? Would this funding, if it's tied in that way, not only provide assistance, but increase the voice of women in local affairs? That could be useful. The question is this reality or just lip service? Before we were talking about the difference between maybe the reality of the structural adjustment loans and lip service, but is it the same thing with CDD? That's the question we're going to ask. The claims about CDD are actually very bold. So I took this from a World Bank report. This is actually pretty representative of the kinds of claims that are made about community-driven development. So here they say experience demonstrates. They don't say research evidence demonstrates, but it's okay. Experience demonstrates that by relying on poor people to drive development, CDD has the potential to make poverty reduction more responsive, more inclusive, more sustainable, and more cost-effective than centrally led programs, achieving both immediate and lasting results at the grassroots level. So this is a very common claim. You hear the claim in development all the time, in NGOs and policy circles, that the key to development is grassroots involvement. That somehow if we can get grassroots involvement, that'll solve most of our problems, or at least many of our problems. This is repeated so often in development that people often took it for granted. It must be true. Listen to the people, talk to the people, live with the people. That's the way forward. This is like, you hear this, every single development NGO brochure has some variant of this claim, basically. No development NGO says, we decided for communities what they're going to do, and we did it for them. Even if the NGO really does that, even for NGOs that really do everything centrally, they always claim they're very locally driven. And again, I know this from having worked with some NGOs in East Africa, that the gap between reality and rhetoric is sometimes there. So what does community-driven development look like? Community-driven development, this is in Sierra Leone, which is the paper that I'll talk about where we study this. Community-driven development means facilitating lots of village meetings to talk about important issues in the community. What should be funded? What funding should be raised? What should we do next with the money we raise in our village? Build a school? Build a well? Do something else? Should we train people in certain skills? What are our community's needs and objectives? And by having these kinds of meetings with facilitators, and I forget who here was a facilitator, I think it's the guy in the back with the clipboard. The facilitator is supposed to lead a discussion that's inclusive and make sure women and young people and old people, everybody's involved, and tries to reach some kind of consensus around what a good policy would look like for the village. The opposite of that in Sierra Leone is decision-making by traditional leaders. Sierra Leone has very strong chiefs, traditional chiefs, who have a lot of local power. So the question is, do you want chiefs deciding, are we going to build a school or a well? Or do you want the community to sit around and say, we really need a well. That's what we really need. So this is what we're going to talk about in the Casey et al. Project, which was a local community-driven development program called GoBeFo in Sierra Leone, which means move forward in Creole. And the program was a randomized experiment in 200-something villages that we worked on implementing, we worked on evaluating between 2005 and 2009. It was implemented by the government of Sierra Leone. This was a government of Sierra Leone program, almost entirely funded by the World Bank. And in fact, the whole template of what the program should look like very closely follows dozens of other World Bank-funded CDD programs around the world. There's a kind of standard template. There's a group of practitioners and researchers within the World Bank who have come up with best practices around community-driven development programs. And they came in and helped design this with government of Sierra Leone officials. But I think this looks a lot like the standard World Bank CDD program. So we were interested in studying it. The civil war in Sierra Leone ended in 2002. We started planning this program in 2004. Sierra Leone in 2004 was just devastated by the war, truly devastated. And there was a feeling that this was a chance to build up local institutions, to build up village governments in a new way after the war, make them more democratic, get women involved, and maybe set rural Sierra Leone on a different path than they'd been going on before. That was the objective. So what did the GoBeFo program look like? There were three components. The first component was money. So money was given to these villages for public projects. About $4,600 was given to each village, and there's about 100 households in each village. So you can do the math, it's about $50 per household in a place, and this is not PPP, this is in exchange rate terms. So in exchange rate terms, per capita income in Sierra Leone at this time was about $300 a year. So $50 is a lot of money in per capita terms in rural Sierra Leone. This was supposed to go to public goods or local training or local small business loans, local public projects. The second component was training and facilitation. So there were facilitators, staff of the program, who lived in some of the villages that they were working in. And in fact, each of them was supposed to work in 5 villages, and they spent 1 day a week in each village. They were supposed to go to the village with very high frequency to call meetings, to meet with women's groups and youth groups, to meet with the local chiefs, to meet with they had set up a local council. So I should mention one of the real key elements here was establishing a village development committee, VDC, that was elected, whose goal was to figure out how to spend all that money. And the institution of the committee was supposed to last beyond the project. So we're going to set up this council, this committee, and seed it with a lot of money, have them decide over a few years how to spend it, and then have them continue raising money and deciding how to spend money on local projects. So literally the creation of a new local government institution. That was one of the goals. The village was supposed to get together and make a medium-term plan. They set up bank accounts for all the committees. None of them had bank accounts before. They trained them in accounting practices and basically how to keep records and books, and actually gave them the materials and the training to do that. So they were really trying to professionalize local government. That's one way to think about it. Professionalize it and democratize it, because that council was elected. Village chiefs are not elected. It is inherited. You have to belong to a chiefly family. So the traditional authority was not democratically chosen. These were democratically chosen. That's a big change. Radical. Yes, so that is a great question. If you look at the heads of the village development committees, in the majority of cases, I think it's 52% of cases, it was the local traditional authority. And that's something we're going to come to when we think of the impacts here. And the limitations of outsiders trying to manipulate and create institutions is there was a very strong pre-existing institution of traditional chieftaincy. Village development committees were formed with this money, and in many cases, the local chief took over the village development committee. And that's going to be the reality of this setting. And you shouldn't be surprised by that. When there's money on the table and influence, the locally powerful people are going to take control. Let me take your questions in one sec. I will say that when this project was being designed initially, we had many discussions with the government of Sierra Leone staff about exactly this issue, and saying, if you just sort of create a committee and you don't try to keep the chief off, he's going to take over the committee. And they said, of course, we know that. That's obvious. But if we exclude the chief, he's going to crush this program. If we tell the chiefs, this is an institution that goes around you, or this is an institution that's meant to check your power, as soon as you show up, he's going to make sure no one cooperates with you, because he has power. So the idea was you have to cut a deal with the local chiefs, form the committee, and then hope that the committee sort of takes on a life of its own and is strong enough on its own after 4 years that it can stand on its own 2 feet. And that was part of the reason this was such a long-term 4-year project. That's a very long project for CDD projects. They're usually shorter. We wanted to give it sort of the best possible chance to take root. Okay, there were 2 hands. You have a hand up? These are with local banks, but the advantage of having the bank account is allowed, as the World Bank transferred the money to the government of Sierra Leone, and the government of Sierra Leone transferred it to local governments, and local governments transferred it to these village bank accounts. Because it's in the formal system, they can trace where the money went and limit some of the leakage or theft. Martin? Do you have what? Yeah, so that was the third component. The third component was requirements to have marginalized groups involved. So for instance, the treasurer of the VDC had to be a woman, and she was a co-signatory on the bank account. So there was a female treasurer with the hope, and the evidence on this is a little unclear. The hope would be that she would be less corrupt than some of the male traditional authorities, and she had to co-sign all transactions with the bank. This was stated explicitly in the documents. The fear was the traditional male elders were very corrupt, so bringing a woman on who wasn't part of that system, she's probably less corrupt. There was a big emphasis on making sure that women's groups and youth got their own funded projects. So a lot of rural African communities have small women's self-help groups. They provide labor on each other's land, they lend each other money. The idea was to fund those groups to carry out projects, to set up their own maybe communal farms, their own common projects. A lot of the youth wanted training in skills. A lot of the youth wanted training as carpenters, tailors, and some of the money went into that. So this was a big emphasis. So not only, the overall goal, there's 3 goals. Number 1 up there, give tons of money to these communities to build public goods. The second goal, professionalize and democratize local government. The third goal, make sure politically weak groups are involved. So this is very ambitious. And this is all supposed to happen in like 3 or 4 years. Okay, what was actually spent by these communities once the money was transferred? Across these 3 or 4 years, about half the money went to infrastructure. Community centers, schools, wells. One type of infrastructure that was built that's pretty interesting is drying floors, grain drying floors. So when you harvest grain, you need to dry it before you transport it. So you have to dry rice. This is a rice growing region. But in areas where you don't have a smooth, concrete drying floor, if you do it on dirt, which people would do, you lose grains, you get rocks in the grain, etc. So grain drying floors were common, latrines. That was about half. And then about half were what you could call small business activities. A lot in agriculture, buying livestock. So women's groups would get together and buy livestock that they would jointly own, or buy better seeds. And then about 17% were sort of non-agricultural small business, training, loans, things like that. But it's about half infrastructure, half small business. That's about the breakdown. And so some of the infrastructures here, you see they're building this little bridge across a river. So in a lot of areas, even basic infrastructure like a small bridge would mean villages on both sides of a river couldn't trade, couldn't communicate. You had to get in a canoe and go across. And in fact, in a lot of the survey work early on, we spent a lot of time on canoes in the southern area where this program was taking place, because there were just so few of these bridges and culverts and other things. And then on the right is a latrine that's being built. Unlike Kenya, remember I mentioned in the deworming paper, latrine ownership in Kenya is very high. 80-something% of households in the deworming study had a latrine in their home. And almost all the schools have latrines. Not so in Sierra Leone. A lot of communities have no latrines. So latrine infrastructure is very important for health. Those are the types of investments. When we spoke up front with the donors and we thought about the research question, we thought of 2 sets of outcomes, which we call hardware and software. I don't know, it's kind of cheesy, but we're in near Silicon Valley, so everybody's trying to be cool. So hardware, what is hardware? Infrastructure, economic outcomes, market outcomes, things like that. Things that we really feel like we know how to measure as economists, as social scientists. So we went around and sent our enumerators or surveyors to actually measure how many latrines are here, how good is the construction, how many school classrooms, how many wells. We looked at how much activity there was in local markets. So in the areas where there had been all this small business investment, we asked, are there actually more businesses in the local market? Are there more goods for sale? We had 39 different outcomes there. The second set of outcomes are a little trickier, a little more difficult to assess. These are what we call software. These are the institutional outcomes, the political outcomes. For 4 years, 1 day a week, a facilitator was in this village, a treatment village, trying to get meetings held. They were trying to encourage people to take votes in meetings rather than just have the chief say what they should do. They were trying to make sure women and youth always had a turn to speak at every meeting. They would try to enforce that all the time to try to change social norms around women and youth having voice in these communities. We asked them whether they voted. We asked them objective questions about how much they knew about politics. Are they just more engaged and knowledgeable about politics? So there were 155 of these outcomes. We also asked questions about social capital. How much do you trust other people? Those kinds of questions. So we have about 200 outcomes. There's a lot of outcomes here, and most of them are here in software just because this stuff is so hard to measure that we wanted to measure it in lots of different ways. We really wanted to make sure that our partners, both in the government and the World Bank, were sort of on board what we were doing. So even though we only came up with some measures, they had their own ideas about what good outcomes would be, so we asked those too. That's why we have 155 outcomes. We even developed some new outcomes. So some of these are kind of fun. We developed 3 new outcomes. We wanted to not just ask people what they did, we wanted to observe what they did. And we actually carried out this data collection after the GoBeFo assistance ended. So it went on for like 3.5 years, and in 2009, all the last grants had been given, the program facilitators left, and we wanted to observe what happened afterwards. Was there really persistent institutional change or not? Or the second the program left, did everything go back to the way it was before? That was our question. So we had 3 activities. Let me tell you about them. The first was a matching grant. The second was a choice between 2 goods, which we observed. And the third is the use of an asset. What does this look like? The matching grant was actually simple. At the end of the project, we said, okay, project's over. We went back a month later and said, to treatment and control communities, all 200-something communities. Thank you for participating. That was great. We want to thank you by giving the community a few $100s in vouchers to be spent at local construction and hardware stores. So there's still lots of projects these communities needed to do. Rural Sierra Leone is one of the poorest parts of the world. There's a million projects they still wanted to do even after the GoBeFo money. We said, we're going to give you these $300 with a match, meaning you have to raise half that amount of money to unleash the voucher. And actually, you could do it in increments of $50. So we wanted to see, after 3.5 years of facilitation, the Village Development Committee, all this involvement, all these village meetings, in the treatment communities, were they better able to raise money to actually match this? This is a no-brainer. This is free money. Everybody should be doing the match. But were the treatment group communities better able to do it? That was the matching grant. The second one was a communal choice. Again, when we went back a month later, project's done, we said, we also, in addition to the voucher, we want to give you another gift to everybody. This one goes to everybody in the community. And we're going to be here for the next 24 hours. In the next 24 hours, people in this village should just decide which of these 2 boxes they want. A box full of bags of salt or a box full of batteries. They had the same market value. They're divisible. There were dozens of these little batteries that could be given to every household, or dozens of bags of salt that could be given to every household. And when we had piloted the activity, it was sort of 50-50, which was chosen. In some areas, like, hey, we really need salt. In some other areas, they said, we really need batteries. And sometimes people would debate about this endlessly. So the idea was, we're going to drop these 2 boxes here and say, you guys have 24 hours. We're going to hang out here. We're leaving tomorrow. And the enumerators would just sit there and watch what happened and record what happened. So in some villages, the village chief came in and said, batteries. So 30 seconds later, they got batteries. It was done, and we recorded. It took 1 minute. The chief made the decision. That was it. In other communities, there was a 3-hour meeting to discuss which there was going to be, and 40 people spoke, and there were arguments, and there were 3 votes until they could decide. It was like a student group meeting. And the question is, does the treatment group look more like student groups or more like the top-down dictatorships? And we're going to find out on Tuesday. We're out of time.